Ursula von der Leyen there, the European Commission President. With me is Professor Mark Sutton. He's an environmental physicist. He's the director of the International Nitrogen Management System. But we're going to talk first of all, Mark, about methane.
No problem.
Why is methane more dangerous to the climate than carbon dioxide?
Basically, it's to do with the infrared absorption lines. Methane is just absorbing it more quickly, giving a more powerful signal. That means that it's essentially something like 15 to 20 times more powerful per molecule than carbon dioxide.
So this deal that they've signed today, how significant do you think it is?
Now, I haven't seen the methane deal. You're ahead of me, Christian.
Well, 100 countries have agreed to cut 30% of it by 2030.
Yeah, and that's really, really great. The methane is coming from cattle, sheep, livestock, industry, all sorts of sources. And of course, if you think about energy sources, every molecule of methane lost is a loss of something that could have been deliberately burned for fuel and energy. So think about biofuel sources, decompose your methane, get off your methane, and you burn it and turn it into carbon dioxide. So you get the heat. And secondly, you reduce its power as a greenhouse gas.
The reason you haven't heard about this methane announcement, I know, is because you're running around educating governments about these gases in the air. I saw Mark yesterday at the tea bar, and you said, have you talked about nitrous oxide yet? And I said, I'll be honest, I don't know what nitrous oxide is, Professor. So why don't you explain it again for our audience?
Nitrous oxide is laughing gas. It's what the dentist used to give you in the old days when you had your teeth out. But it's a really powerful greenhouse gas. There's a tiny amount of it in the atmosphere. And the big issue is that we need to address it because it's one of the 3 greenhouse gases, but it's almost entirely being forgotten. And the reason for that, I think, is once you get to the 3rd, you kind of forget about it. And we always talk about CO2 equivalents, and that means you're forgetting about the nitrogen part. The key thing about nitrous oxide is if we want to reduce it, a few technical measures is not going to do it. We have to completely embrace the whole nitrogen cycle to transform for more efficient agricultural systems, better wastewater recycling, less emissions from combustion sources. Now what that means is when we transform the entire nitrogen cycle, not just the carbon cycle, everybody here is talking about the carbon cycle. We're saying you've got to do nitrogen as well, and when doing that, because we're transforming the system, it means better air quality, better water quality, biodiversity, health, stratospheric ozone layer. And in the Colombo Declaration, which was led by the government of Sri Lanka, they've set out the ambition to halve nitrogen waste by 2030. And if you look just at the street value, the fertilizer value of that nitrogen, that's a saving of $100 billion a year.
So you're scurrying around educating these leaders about that. Do you think you can get a deal by the end of this 2-week period?
I would really love to say so. Tomorrow morning, 11:30 in the Lomond Room, the South Asia Cooperative Environment Programme is putting on the table something called Nitrogen for Net Zero, number 4, Net Zero. That is basically saying that the nitrogen discussion has to be part of the negotiations. It won't be quantitative goals at this point, but even getting it on the table to say, you've got to look at nitrogen, that's going to be making the difference.
It's about changing behaviours, and some of it's really simple. I mean, for methane, for instance, it's landfill and how we put landfill away and how we dispose of our household rubbish. It's about how we feed our cows. It's about how we flare oil and gas, and there are a lot of oil wells in America, I've been reading today, that don't produce much oil, but they produce an awful lot of methane. So what is it with nitrous oxide? What can we do to stop it going into the atmosphere?
Yeah, so the first step, there are a few technical sources of nitrous oxide, nitric acid manufacture, but those are a small sector. The big sectors are agriculture and wastewater. And as I said, we've got to reinvent the nitrogen cycle for more efficient practices. So in wastewater, think about a sewage treatment plant. It's actually called denitrifying, converting nitrogen resources into pure atmospheric dinitrogen gas. So 78% of every breath we take is pure nitrogen. Does nothing, makes the sky blue. But when we convert it into those nitrogen compounds and they degrade, they start forming nitrous oxide. So instead of deliberately letting them degrade in a wastewater treatment plant, we should be recovering, recycling that nutrients, turning it back into fertilizer resources to go back into farming. And that's where ultimately we can see the saving.
Just going to talk about the pictures that we're looking at. The room is filling up in the room behind me, actually. All the journalists are there because we're about to get Boris Johnson, who's going to give us an update on where they've got to with the first 48 hours of this summit, the leaders part of it. Many of the leaders leaving tonight to leave their delegations in place to carry on the negotiations. I mean, when you're going around a summit like this, do you get a feel for whether it's going well or whether it's going badly?
I don't know about your big deal on carbon, but I can tell you that nitrogen is coming forward. We had it mentioned in the head of state speech from the president of Sri Lanka yesterday, 30 seconds head of state speech on nitrogen. This is going places. Tomorrow morning we've got 8 countries of South Asia working together through the South Asia Cooperative Environment Programme saying, we, the South, are going to be the world leaders on this, and the North has to listen. So UKRI, that's United Kingdom Research and Innovation, have given us, as scientists, £20 million, that's great, to work with all the countries of South Asia, and that's Global Challenge Research Fund, South Asia Nitrogen Hub. That is, let's say, informing with science, getting all those country scientists working together, getting all those 8 countries working together, and let's face it, the countries don't always get on well with each other. But what we're saying is they do get on well working to this common goal on nitrogen.
Just getting parochial for a minute, because in the latest budget, the Prime Minister has put an awful lot of money into science to try and up our game and compete with Europe. Do you feel, as a UK scientist, that things are getting better, that your expertise, which clearly you've brought to a global summit like this, is being recognised?
I'd like to think so. I think UK has potential to become a global leader with big projects. I think the reality is that when we were in the European Union, there was 20 years of experience of how to do big projects, and we've now got to learn that ourselves.
Professor Sutton, lovely to talk.